Many years ago in the 1980s and 90s, I gathered with members of our congregation and tens of thousands of other people in Sydney. We would gather at Hyde Park and form in our groups with our signs and our banners and placards, and we would march. We'd march through the city streets to the Domain. We would march for peace. This was the height of the Cold War, and the rhetoric of the USA and the USSR was escalating as they stockpiled weapons of mass destruction. Nuclear weapons that could destroy life and property. Weapons whose only intent was to kill and destroy. And we were standing against that. The billions of dollars that were spent on these weapons and the fear that this escalation of violence conjured in people's minds was enough to bring out hundreds of thousands across Australia and millions perhaps across the world to speak out for peace. And that the billions of dollars could be spent in bringing care and health and food and water and sanitation and maternal and neonatal care into the world where it was most needed. As we gathered in the Domain, there were tents and groups promoting their ways into peace. There were speeches, political, religious and social justice, people from across the range of society. And the group of people that amassed there represented all parts of our society, men and women, young and old, rich and poor, religious, non-religious, political, non-political, people who were of different colour, skin and culture and language, a whole diversity of people standing together to speak out for peace. And through the speeches there were those with high rhetoric who could speak with logic and tell the story and facts and figures and convince us of what could happen and should happen. But others used story and poetry and humour, and there was much humour and comedy in the songs, in some of the street theatre that mocked the ways of power. Many of the signs had interesting caricatures of world leaders, highlighting their weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Use of humour to mock we who were feeling overwhelmed and overpowered by this strength and might in the world could use comedy to laugh and think of another way, dream of another way of being in our world. The particular day on which we met every year was Palm Sunday, a particularly significant day in the Christian calendar, the beginning of Holy Week, the day that memorializes and celebrates Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. He entered in Jerusalem that year at the beginning of Passover week, a very high celebration and holy festival in the Jewish calendar. And the streets of Jerusalem would be swelling with pilgrims from all over the nation and the empire, coming to celebrate this story at the heart of their life, to remember their forebears, their ancestors who were slaves in Egypt, living under the conditions of slavery and domination under the pharaohs, work that was hard and bitter, and they longed and yearned for freedom. And they prayed and they cried out. And the story goes that God heard their prayers and Moses was sent as a leader, a deliverer. And under his leadership they were liberated from this slavery in Egypt and sent out on a journey to a new land and a new life, a new way. And each year they celebrate this, and the youngest in the family asks the questions and the oldest tells the story, and they remember who they are. They remember the liberation that God has brought upon them. And this celebration in the first century, I guess, was particularly significant as the people suffered and struggled under the weight of Rome. The weight of Rome that was empire with its domination and its violence and its armies and its threats and its high taxation. And they yearned to be free of Rome. And so every year in this Passover celebration there'd be uprisings, there'd be foments of anger and nationalism and there'd be trouble. And so the Romans would send in their soldiers to keep the peace. The peace of Rome, the Pax Romana. Peace that comes at the end of a sword. Peace that comes through violence, through strength and might overwhelming the poor and weaker. And so on that week, coming in from probably the Mediterranean city of Caesarea Maritima on the coast, this army of Rome, soldiers, foot soldiers and soldiers on horseback, marching into Jerusalem. The clash of leather and metal, the feet, the drumming of feet, the sound of trumpets heralding this coming of Rome, the power, warning all the citizens and occupants of Jerusalem to behave themselves, or else there would be trouble. Rome was here, and probably the governor Pilate came as part of that. The symbol of Roman power and authority to quell any uprisings. Jesus arrives in the outskirts of the city from his long journey up in the north. He arrives in the valleys amongst the olive trees and groves and the gardens. And he sends disciples out to the local village and says, "Go and get for me the donkey and its colt and bring them to me. And if anyone asks who it's for, tell them the master wants it, needs it." They do as they're told. They bring the donkey back. They put their garments on the donkey and then put Jesus on. And they lay their garments on the road. And they take branches and palms from the trees and wave them. And there's this procession, this kingly procession. And they cry out, "Hosanna, Son of David, Hosanna." Hosanna means save us, deliver us, Son of David. This is about the King coming and bringing deliverance. That was their cries. Anyway, this parade of disciples and followers, and perhaps those who were gathering, pilgrims who were coming in from that direction to the city, gather and follow and hail Jesus as he goes into the city. And in the crowded streets, the people are saying, "What's this? What is it?" This is Jesus of Nazareth, the prophet. And Jesus goes into the temple and he turns it upside down. He goes in and he questions the money changers, this temple culture where pilgrims and people have come to pray, to make sacrifice to God, to bring forgiveness and healing and life. And they're charged taxes in the legal system, in the temple system. People making money out of this spiritual life of the pilgrims. And he says, this is a den of thieves, not a house of prayer. Two actions of Jesus. One, this simple riding into Jerusalem. Whilst Rome comes in power and might, announcing power and might, and here we are, Jesus comes in vulnerability. On a donkey, the symbol of peace. He comes riding, announcing the reign of God that's here. The reign of God that comes in love and peace and freedom for all people. The reign of God which is about justice and life for everyone. Inclusion and welcoming and hospitality and generosity. He comes. He comes simply, vulnerably, humbly. Whilst they come with armies and swords and spears and might. He comes and mocks the Roman procession coming in. You come with your armies, here am I. The reign of God is for everyone. And whatever you do, however you use your power, you cannot quell the reign of God. Because the reign of God is here, everywhere, wherever people love each other. Wherever there's kindness and sacrifice and generosity, wherever there's justice and peace and life and joy, wherever people work together and welcome one another, the reign of God is there. And you can't destroy it. But Jesus' words are too much for the powers that be. The powers that be in his own nation and the powers that be at Rome. And a few days later they'll nail him to a cross. It's ludicrous that this simple rabbi who has nothing, who brings nothing with him, who has no soldiers or army, is such a threat to the system. because he's free. He's free within himself, and there's nothing they can do or say to generate fear. He's not afraid because this perfect love he experiences in God drives out all fear. He is fearless and he is free. And that threatens them. There's a little story I've told before of a man, a simple little man in a concentration camp. And despite all the barbed wire and the cells and the structures around him that deny him freedom, he is free within himself. And there's nothing that these guards and this system can do to stop him being free. One day he goes out into the yard with his guitar and he sings and plays, and the prisoners gather round, and the song moves them and fills them, and they in that moment experience the freedom that he has. And the guards see it and they don't like it, so they take the man away and they beat him up and they break his fingers and warn him off. But the next day he's there with his broken fingers trying to strum, and he sings again, and the prisoners gather round and they experience his freedom again. And the guards hate it, and so they carry him away and they break his guitar and they cut his tongue out and they warn him off yet again. And the next day he's back, this broken body, and he's swaying and dancing to the song he hears in his head. And as he does, the prisoners gather around and they can experience the dance and the freedom of this man. And for that moment they are free. They know his freedom. And the guards hate it, and they take him away and they beat him up and they break his legs and they warn him off. He can do it no longer. But the next day his friends carry him into the yard and lay him down in the dirt. And there he is, this broken, battered, bloody body, lying there, and the song of freedom he hears in his head, and he sways his head to the rhythm of the song, lying there. And the prisoners gather round and they see the vulnerability and they see the movement, and gradually they feel the rhythm and the dance, and they too are moved, and there is freedom, and the guards can do nothing. They are beaten, defeated. They cannot deny this man his freedom. That's Jesus. Free. Free to be who he is. Free to live, to speak this way of love and justice and hope. He comes riding on a humble donkey, mocking the armies and the march, the procession of Rome. Here I am, the reign of God, the reign of love. And the powers of the world can't cope. But what about you and I? Which procession will we join? Will we join that one of power and might that is about domination and fear? Will we in fear submit to the powers of the world, of the empire? Or will we join in the celebration of the vulnerable reign of God? This way of love and justice, this way of peace. Will we experience the freedom of God's love and join in that dance